Yeah, I want to say that again just because it's like one of my favorites. Like self-compassion delivers everything self-improvement promised us, right? Self-improvement, like if I get better, if I look better,
Mm-hmm.
if I make more money, if I get the boyfriend, if I get the job, if I get fill in the blank, then I'll be lovable, then I'll be good enough. And the irony is self-compassion says right here, right now, you as you are enough. Let go of any improving.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Little Waves Project podcast. I'm your host, Kim Foss. The intention of this podcast is to share stories of people who are willing to be vulnerable, speak truth, and share learnings from their experiences. Through my story and the powerful stories of others, I will offer resources that will inspire us to be our best selves, our real selves. As we take our realness out into the world, we can create a powerful ripple effect of love, positivity, and authenticity. So as always, if you are listening to this story and you think that it would resonate with somebody or help somebody through their journey, please share it with them. You can find this episode and others at kimfoss.me on the Little Waves Project page. Okay, are you all ready to dive in? Let's make a wave. Well, we made it. This is the very first episode of the Little Waves Project podcast, and Taylor White Moffitt is the guest on the first episode here, and she comes with a ton of experience. She has been a psychotherapist for 25 years. She has also been a yoga teacher leading these transformational retreats for over 10 years now. She's created something out of nothing except for her creativity and her spirit. She's devoted herself to living her authentic truth and helping others do the same. Within the first 5 minutes of this episode, you can tell that Taylor is just comfortable in her own skin. She shares a lot about how she got to where she is today. She shares her wisdom from working with over 1,000 different people, and we talk about the fundamental need for love and belonging. We talk about the importance of shedding the costumes and masks and the stories that we've made up to defend ourselves. She shows us how to take steps towards being our authentic self. She talks about why therapy is stigmatized. She talks about exchanging real currency instead of just small talk. Honestly, guys, this is an incredible episode. I got a ton out of it, and I think you will too. So enjoy. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us on the first episode. I am so excited to share your wisdom with the world. I am just really feeling lucky to talk to you today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. And I was thinking, getting ready to talk with you here today, Kim, that I love that your podcast is called Little Waves, but I think you're already like upping the bar because in the first podcast, I'm like, you're already going big. So it might be like big waves. So you might have to edit the name of your podcast going forward.
Oh, man. Thanks. I'm blushing now. No, thank you, Taylor. And I do hope this makes a big wave. And just to get us started, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm originally from Massachusetts and I moved to Colorado in 1992. And that's important because that was sort of the beginning of everything changing for me. I grew up in a really wonderful and pretty conservative family with a lot of high expectations and a lot of silent pressure to be quiet. I was always the shit stirrer in my family and always the one getting the feedback that I was too much. And the day I moved to Boulder, Colorado, I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was August 25th, 1992. I drove over the Flatirons and I drove into Boulder and I could feel my lungs expand for the first time. Like I could breathe for the first time as an adult. And I just really felt like I was home. And that was 1992. So 28 years later, here I am. And I am, like you mentioned, I've been a therapist. I see couples and individuals in my private practice with all sorts of different human experiences and challenges. And then I've been teaching yoga and meditation as well as leading transformational retreats since, I guess now about 2010. So 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I know from experience, I've actually attended a couple of your retreats, and and sessions, and I've gotten a lot out of it. And I guess before digging into the details there, I'm just a little more curious about your journey here. So not only just your physical journey across the country to show up in Colorado, but the journey that you've been on to get where you are today. I think you're super successful. I look up to you a lot. I think you're a total badass. And I just am curious, like, what your journey looked like and the courage that it took to get here.
Sure. So I think growing up, I didn't realize at the time, but looking back now, I would say I've always been a spiritual person. And how that showed up for me as a kid was I would always ask questions. We'd go to my aunt and uncle's house and I'd be like, how come they're never talking or sleeping in the same bedroom? Or how come she's always drunk? And I would always ask these questions. And my family was kind of like, why are you always asking questions? Stop asking questions. And now at 50, I realized like, oh, that was spirituality, like the curiosity of like just what's going on in the world and what's true. So I think for me, that's always how I was wired. That's kind of how I came into the world. And then, like I said, I was on a path to do a very conservative track and get a very formal traditional degree. And I realized probably about 2 weeks before I moved to Boulder that it was not for me. I was not meant to be there. So I drove to Boulder to stay for a winter. And I realized in the few months I was here that it was really time to wake up and not follow the very traditional track of where most of the people I grew up with were on. And probably about a year after I was here, so 1993, 94, I was a runner back then, and I was running through an alley downtown where I lived, and I was just all of a sudden found myself on my knees. And it wasn't like anyone shoved me. I didn't trip. There wasn't like the hand of God, but I just kept hearing like, you can't go on like this anymore. And I was really kind of stunned by it. And I kept feeling like it was a spiritual awakening. And at the time, I didn't really identify myself as at all as a religious or spiritual person, but I could not deny what had happened to me. And the saying that kept going through my head, like, you can't go on like this, it just became so clear within 24 hours that I couldn't go on bullshitting myself and pretending and being somebody I wasn't. So I think that was the beginning of it for me. And at that point, I was in graduate school to get my master's in social work. And it was really clear for me that private practice was where I felt like I could have the most influence, was helping people really recognize that their suffering, no matter what it was really just part of their human experience. And I always say to my clients and my students that they save me more than I could ever save them. They're always inspiring me more than I could inspire them. And I think I just knew at that point that I needed to have real, truthful conversations every day. And probably from that time to this day, I've spent almost 30 years trying to do that, from being a therapist to teaching yoga to retreats and et cetera.
Through your experience, you've worked with hundreds of people. They inspire you with the work that they're doing with you, which is a win-win. That's pretty cool because the work you're doing is constantly serving you as well, which is pretty cool. But have you learned any themes across these people that you're working with that have been inspiring to you, or anything you've learned just by working with so many different types of humans? Is there a common thing that's happening between them?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Absolutely. So at this point, having been a therapist for 25 plus years, I probably worked with, I'm going to say easily over 1,000 people. And what often stuns me about it is people will come in, and if you ask them, why are you here? They'll say, I'm thinking about going through a divorce. I'm changing careers. I have anxiety. I have issues with my family of origin. I have issues with my kids. Whatever it is that kind of gets them to my office, I would say what's a fascinating theme that shows up is that people show up for one reason, but they believe that reason is often the problem. Like, my spouse is the problem. My addiction is the problem. My depression is the problem. And what I would say I've learned in all this time is that that's actually just the symptom. That the problem is, I think we're really a culture that doesn't support contemplation. It doesn't support curiosity. We don't live in a culture that supports asking questions. You're supposed to already know and be right and have it figured out. And so what most people are really suffering with is a sense of inadequacy, that they're more flawed than the next person. Their issues are greater than the person that lives next to them. And so they often hide the very thing they're struggling with. Again, their difficulty in marriage, their addiction. However, the real truth behind it is not putting it out into the world, not talking about it with someone. That's what's causing their suffering. And it's just reinforcing repeatedly how inadequate they feel. So I would say that's probably the most significant. I think the second thing that's shown up, and this has become much more present to me in the last 4 or 5 years, is that we all struggle. We're all challenged by whatever it may be, you, Kim, and me, and everybody else. And one of the most primitive ways we struggle, can we swear on this podcast?
Sure.
Yeah. It's we're so fucking hard on ourselves. We're just so incredibly hard on ourselves. And inside most of us lives a bully. I remember once my teacher saying to us, most of us, if we talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves, wouldn't have any friends. And I remember at the time feeling found out, like, oh my God, he knows how I'm talking to myself, and it's not very nice. And so I would say that led me to teaching a class, the art and practice of self-compassion, but it's also led to me deepening my own practice of self-compassion, as well as spending a lot of time with individual clients and on retreat and in other opportunities talking about the power of self-compassion and how it has the capacity to change our life. And I always love thinking about it as self-improvement is really where a lot of us put our energy. And in the simplest way, self-compassion delivers everything that self-improvement promised us. Yeah, I want to say that again, just because it's like one of my favorites. Like, self-compassion delivers everything self-improvement promised us, right? Self-improvement, like if I get better, if I look better, if I make more money, if I get the boyfriend, if I get the job, if I get fill in the blank, then I'll be lovable, then I'll be good enough. And the irony is self-compassion says right here, right now, you as you are enough. Let go of any improving.
That reminds me of this concept, and I think we've actually talked about it together, this climbing a ladder. And then once you finish climbing that ladder, you start climbing another ladder and again and again. And, if you're not careful to pause and think about it, you could be climbing ladders for your entire life and maybe missing the beautiful, wonderful things about yourself that are right in front of you.
Without a doubt. And I think that is, if you look around, what most people are doing, right? They're trying to perform, they're trying to achieve, they're trying to crawl their way to love and belonging. And unfortunately, what they're actually doing is they're crawling their way to fitting in, whether it's learning how to play field hockey in 5th grade, whether it's wearing a certain outfit, whether it's saying a certain thing. What we are really skilled at is fitting in. And I think Brene Brown's brought a great bit of joy to this conversation. There's a huge difference between fitting in and belonging. And that difference between fitting in and belonging really comes back to, can I be myself 110%, not feel like I need to fit in, to improve? And when we have that, that's when we know we found our people, whether it's at home or work or our sports team or whatever it is. If I belong and I can be myself, that's when I know I'm absolutely in the right place.
Logically, this makes sense to me. And I remember learning some of these things for the first time and my mind totally exploded. And I was, I just never thought about things in this way before. Could you speak a little bit to like the importance of feeling it in an embodied way? Like, I think your retreats really speak to that because it gets people out physically away from their normal space where they can feel some of the things you're talking about.
Sure. So I think what I'd say, what led me to retreat, and actually what led me to teaching yoga, was I had been a therapist for 10 or 15 years, and I had been a yoga practitioner at that point for a solid 10 years. I'm someone who's a complete self-described extrovert, but I made this commitment to myself that the first year I went to practice yoga, I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't talk to the teacher. I didn't talk to other students. And it was some of the first experiences I had in my life where I could actually feel my breath. I can remember being a yoga student for about a year, and the teacher had been talking about breath for probably a year, but there was that day where it was like, oh my God, there's my freaking breath. Like, there it is. I can feel it. I can feel it in my body. And I began to have these experiences that helped me to access my body what I would call sort of below my neck, that I had spent most of my life living in a culture and an experience and even in a body where I had put everything sort of above my neck, and everything I didn't want to feel or didn't know what to do with, I just kind of shoved down below there in hopes it would go away and not bother me. And so I really felt like yoga was changing everything about my life, and it was making me more hopeful and more enthusiastic and more excited every day. And so what I wanted to do was go teach to a population that nobody wanted anything to do with. So I went to take a training with James Fox, the director and founder of the prison yoga program in California. And I wanted to go teach in prisons. But at the time I had 4 little boys under the age of 10. So it wasn't really syncing up with my world. And so this flyer came across my desk one day, and it was really beautiful, kind of watercolor pen and ink. And it was this nautilus shell. And it was like, come to Mexico and kind of explore yourself. And all of a sudden I was like, what have I been doing? This is exactly what I need to be doing. And so I found a retreat center, and I think I put $20,000 down, and I'd never taught a yoga class, and was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but something about this just feels like a yes. And I remember calling my dad for the money because I didn't want to tell my husband I was too chicken. And I just was like, Dad, I need you to give me this money because I'm going to do this thing. And I'll pay you back. And he didn't, my dad was, one of the things my dad's great about is he's really an entrepreneur and believes in following your heart. He's very creative. And he was like, sure. And I was like, okay. So next thing you know, I have these flyers up that say like, come on yoga retreat with Taylor. And half people I know are like, we didn't know you taught yoga. And I was like, well, I don't actually, I just started. So I basically booked this super expensive retreat center to a place I'd never been to, with 20 spots I needed to fill, having never taught yoga and having no idea what I was doing. And God bless my poor first students. They're really, some of them have still been on retreat again with me. So I guess it wasn't too bad. But I guess what I felt at that time was what I was doing as a therapist, what I was practicing as a yogi, what I was experiencing in meditation, that it was all coming together for me in a way that just felt completely in alignment. I did a lot of my teacher training early on with Baron Baptiste, and I give him a lot of credit for really opening up all of the limbs of yoga and teaching us that although in the United States, yoga is often considered asana, the poses, yoga is really who you're being, how you're being, where you're being, and where are you? And all of that allows us to have this embodied experience. And so for me, beginning to lead retreats, which started again in 2010, and now I'm doing 2 or 3 a year, and we're taking people on scholarship, that for me, retreat is this opportunity to put pause on your life, actually feel who you are, what matters, what's important to you, so that you can actually go back to your life and start to put the tools into play so that you have a capacity to be embodied daily, even if it's for moments. And those moments start to thread together. I often call them firefly moments. And these little firefly moments ultimately illuminate the whole sky for us.
I remember the first time I went on one of your retreats, and I quickly found out that it was not the normal margaritas and mariachi bands.
Yeah.
It was amazing, guys. And those firefly moments definitely occurred. And I just didn't expect the power of what would happen just by going, quieting those distractions, and sharing with people what was coming up, whatever it was. And also just the power of listening to other people who are also going through their own human experience. And it's just powerful to hear other people speak about some of the things that you can resonate with, and that's partially the intention of this podcast, is to share people's stories.
Yeah, and I love the margaritas and mariachi, because there's always, probably every retreat I've led, there's somebody that first morning that's like, oh shit, like I kind of knew what this was going to be, but like there's no going back. And I think what I find interesting about that is, to me, time is one of our most precious commodities, and it's amazing how we give it away, all of us, me included. And I look at in the pandemic how much time we've spent on Instagram and social media. And on one hand, there's this amazing Little Waves podcast that like you should spend your time listening to because it's going to be inspiring. On another hand, do we need to scroll through Facebook and Instagram for 7 hours comparing ourselves to people who are making sourdough bread starters while we're just trying to shower and brush our teeth? And I think when I first started leading retreat, what really shocked me was how many people of all walks of life were leading what they were calling retreats, but they were essentially the same old life people were leading on vacation. So it was like, come do your fill in the blank, come do your CrossFit, come do your yoga, come do whatever for an hour in the morning, and then party and sightsee and shop and sleep and do it again for like 4 to 7 days, and then go home and need a vacation from your vacation. And so I think that for me, I know for me that what was imperative about retreat was having had the experience myself, is that there was no way I was going to ask people to step away from their life and not come back more whole than they arrived. That was like my whole intention. And in that, what I feel is the power of everything I teach and everything I do in my office is that my belief is powerfully connecting to yourself and powerfully connecting to others helps us to feel purpose, aliveness, and peace. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm pretty much all for that every day. So like if I could do that, do I want to come back from 7 days of retreat hungover and wrung out? Or do I want to come back like awake, inspired, and like, what's the next purposeful place for me to step?
Everything you're saying is super inspiring. It makes sense to me that that's something we would strive towards. And can you explain to us, maybe what somebody looks like when they show up on retreat, still with their distractions, still thinking about what happened at work last week, and then what that transformation looks like to their more authentic selves?
So I think generally what we're unaware of is we walk around just attempting to look good. So we wear our costumes and our masks to please our family, our neighbors, our book group, our friends, whomever it is. And we're really invested in looking good because we spent our life fitting in. We don't have many places or people we actually belong to. So when people show up on retreat, that's really no different. And oftentimes people will later tell me the story like, oh, I was on the shuttle ride in and everybody was annoying me. Oh, it was the first night and I thought, this is bullshit. Oh, it was like day 2 and I was annoyed that we had this like schedule you had us on. And what people feel is immediately I'm pressing up against, trying to get them to peel off, to first recognize and then peel off their masks and their costumes. But we're pretty invested in those. Those are the way we felt attachment, connection, belonging, even though it's often been diluted or an illusion that belonging is never fitting in. Belonging is wearing your pajamas over to your girlfriend's house, bringing leftovers and having the best evening ever. But most of us are used to putting on the makeup, bringing the bottle of wine, trying to find the right thing to say. And on retreat, often what gets really scary for people is within a day or two, it's clear that that's not only not the expectation, it's not currency on retreat. Like you will be called into the circle with love. People are going to want to hear from you. They're going to want to hear what's authentic. And so at least the circles I travel in, we're using the word authentic a lot more. And what I would say about that is our authentic selves is a self that we don't let a lot of people see. It's the Sunday morning self in our sweatpants with our coffee that has like stains on our shirt, the dog's on the couch with us and the couch is covered with hair. We're, eating cinnamon rolls with our fingers, whatever it is we're doing, we're unfiltered. But of course we live in a world now, like I grew up in a world with no internet. And when you took a picture, you had to go have it developed and you got all these, like of a roll of pictures, you'd get like 20 that were completely terrible and maybe 4 that were great. That's real life to me. But now we have every filter, every airbrush, everything to make it look the way you want. And so I often tell the story, I'm not very internet savvy or social media savvy, but probably 10 years ago, when the internet was first sort of coming into my life and I joined Facebook, I was in Mexico with my boys. And at that point, everyone was really starting to put up their pictures of margaritas and cantilevered pools and the ocean. And I happened to have my phone in my hand and I walked into the room my boys were sharing. I have 4 boys. And one had his hand back cocked, ready to punch his brother. The other one was standing behind the curtain in the hotel room, like bawling. And the other one was on the floor, like completely naked, like rolling in everyone's dirty laundry. And I caught a picture of it and I put it up and I said, in case you're thinking that Mexico is like bliss with my spouse and my kids are playing happily at the beach and everything's beautiful, this is Mexico also. And I think to this day, it might've been my most liked post. I've done plenty of phone sessions on Zoom like this with yoga pants or pajamas on the bottom and a work shirt on the top. this is real life, but we just don't like to talk about that part. We like to filter it. And so the question for me that I asked myself was, how am I going to help people transform, not to improve or be better, but to shed the BS, to shed the costumes, to shed the masks, to shed the story, the narratives, all the stuff we carry that keeps us from feeling ourselves and keeps others from feeling us.
What would you say to somebody if they knew they had these layers on and they logically knew that it would be beneficial to shed them, but maybe there's fear there? There's fear that, I'll get fired, or my boyfriend will break up with me, or my parents will disown me, these real things that could happen.
So what I'd say, first of all, is you're in the right territory. If there isn't some edgy fear, what's the point? Right? Like, we're so controlled, we're so managed that we don't like to, somebody was talking the other day about looking for a job, and she started to say, I'm really good at this, and I have this skill set, and I have this experience. I was like, can you feel the energy of this conversation? She's like, yeah, it's kind of low. I'm like, kind of low? It's like to the bottom low. I'm like, what lights you up? And then she just started bubbling over with all of this stuff. And she's like, but could I make a living? And what would my parents say? And what would my boyfriend say? I'm like, I have no idea what would happen or what anyone would say, but do you feel the energy right now? That's embodiment. That's connecting to yourself, and that's sharing your authentic self with someone else. And so, yeah, there's going to be fear. Of course there's, because you're coming out of your comfort zone. But I think the question is, do we ever stop to ask, what impact is staying in our comfort zone having on us? Right? Because we're super afraid of, if I come outside my comfort zone, I'll just blow apart. I'll be alone. I'll be 500 pounds. I'll live in a trailer. I'll be an addict. No one will love me. I'll just be chewing my fingers, rocking in the corner. But we never stop to say, but what will my life be if I just play it safe and I stay small and I live in my comfort zone?
And the answer to that could be a less fulfilling life. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how it could be anything other than that, right? Because playing small, we feel the constriction. I mean, I think of people who have told me, I just finished law school and I didn't even want to do it. I just finished medical school. I didn't want to do it. I knew the day I married that person, I didn't want to marry them. Oh, that makes me want to put my hands on my heart and say, ouch. But we're so conditioned. Love and belonging is our number one psychological, emotional need. And we got socialized really early on of who we needed to be and who we couldn't be to belong. So some of us were clear without it ever having been said out loud. We couldn't be gay when we felt gay. We couldn't be an artist when we felt we were an artist. We couldn't move away from our family. We got those messages without someone directly saying it. We knew exactly what they were saying. And to belong to them, we began to conform and constrict and contract. And so it's often terrifying as we come into authenticity, because it goes against not only who we thought we were, but who everyone else sees us as.
So the question that comes to my mind is how do you step out? How do you shed that layer? What's that first step that you can do to step towards your authentic self besides going on retreat with you?
Yeah, of course. So I think the number one way is I think it's helpful to put your hands on your body somewhere. I often just put my hands on my heart. And the first question is, who's in there? What does he or she need? What does he or she want? And right there, there'll be forbidden fruit that we wouldn't often feel brave enough to say out loud. And that's what I call our truth. My intuition speaking to me all the time. And it's often not connected at all to my head. I can feel in my body that my belly says, no way, don't do that, Taylor. And out of my mouth says, no problem.
Can you speak a little bit more to the science behind your body and your central nervous system? If you speak truth to yourself, putting your hands on your heart, what does that do in your body?
If you imagine right now, someone came up and put their hand on your forearm, either your whole body relaxes or every hair on your body stands up. Right? That is a central nervous system response. If you walk into your home and the person you live with has their head down on their desk crying, if you walk in and they're sitting with their eyes open, almost levitating like a dog with a bone, there's information without any words, and you feel it in your body before your brain even registers it. So part of what's happening is, as soon as you think about coming out of your comfort zone, your complete nervous system says, don't do it. So you get butterflies in your stomach, you get anxiety, you feel sweaty in your pits or your palms, you feel tension in your feet or your low back, you start to have a physical response. And so one of the things that I love talking about, and you and I have talked about this, is that to me, fearlessness is to be afraid and do it anyway. But for many of us, how we were socialized as kids is the moment we felt sweaty palms, standing up in sixth grade, having to give a little speech or perform a little musical piece. The moment we had to introduce ourselves to an adult that was a friend of our parents and they wanted us to look in their eyes and shake their hand. We felt all those bodily sensations and we used that as a justification to exit. And so to me, we are wisely, like incredibly wisely wired for fight, flight, or freeze. And it's why when a ball rolls across in front of your car, you don't think, I wonder if there's a, and all of a sudden you've just run over a child. Your brain is so fast for life or death circumstances, it immediately has your foot pump the brake. But the challenge is, even in 2020, in a world where there is so much less distress and survival necessary, a lot of us are living with this emotional fight, flight, or freeze. At the moment it's uncomfortable, the moment we're out of the comfort zone, the moment it's a risk, the moment we're afraid, we put our fight, flight, or freeze on. And we often do it in just a quick momentary reaction from the nervous system rather than pausing, breathing, letting the nervous system flutter and kick around and keep going anyway.
What would you say to people who may have the question of, well, we need our fear, we need our fear response. Why would we want to stifle that flight, fight, or freeze?
So I would say, first of all, we absolutely do. And it's why, however they put together these incredible human beings, we're wired for that. And I don't think you can take that away. I mean, maybe if you've gone through really intense trauma where you grew up, let's say, in the South Sudan and people were shooting at you all the time, maybe your nervous system acclimates to that. But I still think we're wired for survival. We have pretty reptilian brains. And even in all of these years of most of us living in much more comfortable ways, we still have that wiring that's right there with us. We also have a nervous system that's wired for it. If I touch my hand to the stove, I think there's less than like 200 people on the planet that don't have nerve endings and pain, right? We are wired to be embodied. And so we don't actually have to have fear because we're wired to survive, to live. The irony is, though, for many of us, we're so focused on fear, worry, anxiety, and survival, we don't even realize there's no thriving. I can't simultaneously lock myself in my room, put bubble wrap around me and then duct tape and be out thriving with my friends at a dinner party. It's not going to happen. I can't have this amazing relationship with my partner while holding all my real currency and my truth and my authentic self in here because I don't think I'll survive it. Surviving and thriving are opposite sides of the coin and they can't really coexist. And so if we want to thrive and become our authentic self, we have to trust that we are wired for survival. Now we're going to get hurt. Like this heart in here, it's meant to be broken. But the great thing is there's nothing to be fearful of. There's nothing to be fearful of because we're wired for all of these experiences. And while difficult things will happen, most of them won't kill us.
I was thinking about these two extremes. You talk about being in bubble wrap in your house and then out thriving with your friends. And say you do trend towards the bubble wrap. And maybe that means that you're not out there and you're not feeling joy and you're also not feeling hurt. So if we protect ourselves from being hurt, are we also protecting ourselves on accident from feeling joy?
So if you could just protect yourself from the dark, unpleasant things, I'm pretty sure we'd all be doing that. But I think what starts to happen is if you actually start to look in the eyes of people at the grocery store and Target and driving in cars, you'll see what I would call just this cultural numbness that it is impossible in my experience to block one or multiple feelings, but stay open to the rest. And ironically, I think people think mostly about blocking the negative, unpleasant experiences. But the truth is the most vulnerable feeling that we feel is joy. Because the second we open up our heart to loving someone, to wanting that job, to being excited that we might get to buy a new house or find a new place we're going to rent, our mind goes right into survival and fear. do I really deserve it? Can I really have it? Will it be mine? When's the other shoe going to drop? He seems so great, but he probably has like another girlfriend in another city that he sees when he travels for work. Like our mind just cooks this stuff up. And so these distractions are essentially taking us out of our body because it's so intense to open ourselves to joy. And I think parents probably know this better than maybe a lot of people, is looking at your child and thinking, my mom and I used to call them CDTs, crazy death thoughts. My boys would go off skiing with my husband. I could see the headline flashing like, father and all 3 sons killed in avalanche while mom home with the baby. And all those CDTs was my attempt to protect myself from the vulnerability. But the truth was, I can remember standing in the driveway in my down coat with the baby while my husband would be pulling out to go skiing with my 3 boys. And I think, how could I be so lucky? I have this amazing husband. I have these wonderful kids. They're all going to go do this great thing like skiing in Colorado. But that was so vulnerable to feel that much joy. My brain would want to shut it down and dress rehearse disaster, I think is the expression we use for that.
I've had some of those thoughts as well. I can totally identify with that. And I found myself sometimes when that happens, and now, I'm aware enough to notice when it's happening, but then sometimes I'll have this reaction of shame. I'm like, oh my gosh, I must be crazy because I just thought that. And I was just wondering if you talk a little bit more about shame and that common response to something so silly.
Yeah, so it's not silly at all. It's very normal and typical, but what makes us feel shameful and silly about it is we don't talk about it. And I think like in a very simple way, when you pass people on the street, walking your dog, when you go to the pharmacy, the rhetorical question is, how are you? Fine. But my rule is, if you ask me, be prepared for the answer. So I often tell a story of going to Whole Foods a number of years ago, and this sweet young boy, couldn't have been a day over like 16. He was like, how are you today, ma'am? And I was like, well, I got my period this morning. I'm super crampy. I'm super grumpy. I feel like I'm being so irritated with everyone. And I have a little bit of a headache, but you're so nice to ask. And I think when those things like people just often like almost black out when I tell them that story, and some interesting things come up that we could unpack for a moment, which is, so the first is sometimes people will say, I don't want to be that Debbie Downer. Well, first of all, as you notice, I didn't hijack the clerk and stack up 20 people behind me by giving him a blow by blow of my entire period and my history of having a period and being a woman. I just gave him like 6 sentences, right? So I don't think that's Debbie Downer. The other is that I think people are worried like, oh, I'm going to be that person who's always talking about themselves. Actually, I find that most of us, as someone's sharing something authentic and real, we're like leaning in, we're like up for it for a long period of time. But if someone's kind of almost gossiping about themselves or talking about things in a really superficial way, in the first 2 minutes, it's unsatisfying. That's when you go to the cocktail party and they're like, how are you? And how's work? And how's your relationship? And you can feel the syrupy tone where like, oh, the expectation is we're not going to share any real currency. We're going to talk about the surfacey things. And like, that makes my skin crawl, right? So I think that what we're really talking about is shame is this sense that inherently I'm flawed. And the irony is, as we become our authentic self by speaking what's true, I find 8 out of 10 people come running up to me to say, oh my God, you too? Thank you so much. Like, I can so relate to that. I can so empathize. Thanks for sharing it. And the 2 people who don't want to run up to us, it's not that they don't have shame. They're so overwhelmed by their own shame. They're running out of there trying to get away as fast as possible. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We've all been there and probably will be again. However, this sense of being ultimately not enough or flawed is part of the wiring of the human experience. And if we share it, we bring it into the light. Shame lives in the darkness. It's like a little petri dish. And if we bring it into the light, right away, someone just saying, you too, me too, we feel better.
Yeah. What if somebody runs away if you express yourself?
Well, let's set it up well right out of the gate. Yeah. They will. And so part of it is we don't toughen our skin. That's an expression people use a lot, like man up, toughen up. I actually think it's the opposite. It's like actually feel that sensitivity. Like it's still, even if it's someone you don't like or care about, or let's say it doesn't even really matter in your life, it still is an ouch because our ego wants to be picked for kickball. We want everyone to love us. We want to share things and have the whole world go, oh my God, that's like the most riveting thing. Like after 5 years, I'm hoping to still be the best person on your podcast, right? The first episode, like that's just the way our ego is run. But what we don't give ourselves credit for is we're so much more than our ego. And while, of course, I want to be chosen for kickball and I want everyone to love me, I've lived 50 years without that happening. I don't love everyone. They don't love me. And as much as my ego gets bruised and dinged, it's not stopping me from living my life.
That's really inspiring. You've found more value in being liked by fewer people, your tribe, than living your life as a chameleon trying to get everyone and everything to like you.
And I think what's important about what you're saying there, Kim, is we have this interesting belief in our culture, I think it is that like more is more. So like more people, more likes on my Instagram page, more. But not only have I found more value, I've actually found authentic quality value, because the people who love me, they know all my shit. And so I know when they tell me they love me, they mean it, because they know me and there's nothing I don't keep from them. However, the people who I used to perform and wear my masks and costumes for, it was actually all an illusion. They didn't like me. They liked my mask. They liked my costume. And they were just as busy wearing their masks and costumes. So it was like two Amazon blow up dolls relating to each other. That's not real. And I never felt like we were real. And that was always the emptiness for me, was growing up in a culture where there was high expectations that were never spoken about who to be and how to relate and how not to relate. And I was constantly bumbling out of the box that was prescribed to fit into. And so for me, there's this sense of I can completely relax into who I am and to having an atypical body, I would say, for being a woman in the culture, and to never being like the smartest, the prettiest, the most wonderful of anything. I am like the most average person on earth, but I feel so at ease in every part of who I am that it's not even something I really spend any time thinking about anymore.
And that's why I think you're above average.
Well, I can say that celebrating my mediocrity and my averageness has led me to live a life of just almost daily celebration. Like I tell people a lot, like I'm far from the best yoga teacher or therapist, but I'm so passionate about what I do that I live a life that's really on fire. And so instead of trying to please others to feel good, I've just set my own life on fire. And it's been the answer to all of my unhappiness and dissatisfaction. So to find that I was in charge the whole time, and the very things I didn't want anyone to know were the actual things that made people close to me and choose me, still blows my mind to this day.
It's very cool. Very cool to think about. It's really nice the way you've put it. There's still this really strong stigmatism around therapy and going to get counseling help to take care of your mental health. It's still such a sensitive topic. And even recently I was speaking with a friend, he's around my age and he's having a really tough time at work, working, 18-hour days right now. And he's struggling. And I asked him if he would be willing to go, to a counselor and maybe just talk to somebody. And he was like, oh no, I don't have relationship problems, so it's just interesting how people are thinking about therapy. And I was just curious, from all of your years of experience, if you could just speak to that stigmatism and what you think about it.
Yeah, of course. So it's funny. I had a friend and her family over, and we're in the time where I feel like I need to explain socially distance outside. The other night they come over for pizza, and her son, who I think he's almost 15, he was saying, oh yeah, my mom, she's like into that therapy thing, but I'm not into it. And I said to him, well, how's your life going? And he was like, not so great. And I was like, oh, so tell me more. And he was saying, well, for me, therapy is like playing baseball, and therapy is like hanging out with my friends. And I was like, and how's that working? He's like, not that well. So I was like, so you just could consider that you have some story that like you're not allowed or you shouldn't need it. And that really, like, if I didn't know how to change a tire, am I just going to stand on the side of the road until I'm like, old and gray and dead? Or am I going to call AAA or a gas station? So I think one thing is just, we live in a culture, particularly for men, where you can't ask for help. And in terms of therapy, you're weak if you're a man and ask for help, and you're histrionic and too emotional and too sensitive if you're a woman and ask for help. And I think what we've done is we just decided there's a really narrow, small box of humanity that we're willing to tolerate in people, and anything outside that box is too much or too little, which is why most of us grew up hearing from people directly or indirectly, we're too much or we're not enough, which basically all that means is you're not okay who you are. And so I think there's that in general. And I think that, again, the other piece of it is, so then someone else said to me recently, gosh, like you're asking me all these questions. Like I feel like you're being a therapist with me. And people will say this to me sometimes. And I guess my response is almost always the same, which is I am always thinking that this could be my last conversation with someone. And if that's the case, I want it to be as alive and real and rich as possible. So as much as I love to go to Red Rocks and dance, and I love to talk about books and movies, if there's something going on for me or you, I'm going to be the first person. I don't care if we're at the grocery store or the laundromat that's going to talk about it and ask questions and bring it up. And I think in our culture, the extension of that is that therapy is considered another place of it being incredibly vulnerable. Like this is a place we share all our secrets. And my hope is that I will eventually not have a job as a therapist because everyone will just be talking about what's really going on to everyone. And they won't have to go to this stigmatized, dark place and feel shameful. And I think the good news is it's already happening. I look at often when my office is typically full, not as the pandemic, I have 3 suite mates and there's all these teenagers in the office and they're like, oh, you see her now? I loved her, but now I'm seeing this guy. And they all talk about it like it's the coolest, best thing ever. And I think that's a big advancement from my generation and even the generation before that where therapy didn't exist and you certainly didn't tell anyone you went, to now people are so open and sharing about it. So I hope all of that is a sign that our culture is moving on this trajectory to say asking for help is a strength, being vulnerable is a superpower, and every place we can do that, the better.
Absolutely. And just thinking about this younger generation that is maybe more open to this idea of therapy and taking care of your mental health and not seeing it as a shameful thing. I've heard you say before that parents can learn from their children. Is that an opportunity in our world today for people to look at their children and just learn what they're exploring?
100%. And I think like what's been really cool about the pandemic is I look at my generation's less tech savvy than yours, and my mother's is less tech savvy than mine. And like, you know, once this all happened, my mom in the first week was like, okay, how do I Zoom? And how do I do this? So it's everything from the logistical things to the emotional places. And again, my mother's generation, there were very few therapists that exist, and people who went were either considered completely crazy or were like secretly wearing like a hood over their head to walk into their therapist's office, all the way down to my kids' generation, where 2 of my kids have been in therapy. They showed up for my self-compassion class. Like they talk openly and outwardly about their mental health challenges, what it means to be human, what it means to be a teenager, what it means to be a boy, a man. And I think that they are, just like I'm saying, my clients and students are so inspiring because every time somebody really shows true currency, which I would say is an authentic emotional risk, it's like, oh, right. I still always want to think that that's done. Like I've done that. Can I be done with that? And then somebody shows up and does it again. And I think that what's going to happen right now is that this next generation is always finding a more productive path, a more loving path, that we're always looking for our kids to have it better than we had it. At least I am for my kids. But they're adapting to what's happening. And it's remarkable to see how much our culture continues to evolve. And I think that it's wonderful for us to live in a city where we have universities and a thriving art and music culture. And that younger generation is always, they're the most awake. They haven't gone to sleep yet, like those of us who have been adults for a while. So they're always calling us to being awake.
Well, if you had to just sum up a couple of tools or tips or resources for our listeners, just based on the conversation that we've had, what would you say?
So I would say that if something in this podcast spoke to you, nurture it. Talk about it, journal about it, share it with a friend, ask questions, find a place where you feel like it might not be easy, but you have some willingness to do that. And it could be your friend, it could be a therapist, it could be a yoga class, your yoga teacher. Like everyone has a path to their own true authentic self, and there is no one way. That's the gift. And so my work is always to help people try to find their own way there. But it starts with listening to yourself and then ultimately trusting yourself so that you speak your truth and go forward from that place. And I also believe that our culture really has missed the mark on being completely self-involved and yet not even really being connected, embodied, or knowing oneself. So pay attention to that. You could take, like I look at sometimes my teenagers taking thousands of selfies for things like Snapchat every day. but how far they really are from who they truly are. And so look at, are you a mask? Are you a costume? Are you an illusion? Do you really know who you are? And that's not an answer to say who I am is blank, because we're changing all the time, but it's to be able to know your own temperature, to know what lights you up, to know what's a no for you, and to start following that. And I think that will always lead you to the right teachers, the right classes, the right therapists, the right friends. Listening to your truth and following it will always lead you to where you want to be. It will always end better.
Thank you, Taylor. That is super powerful, and I really appreciate you sharing that. And just to wrap up our session today, I've been trying to ask a question that, relates to the Little Waves project itself. And so can you tell me about a time where you were affected by someone or something that inspired you to be your authentic self, like a little wave that affected you in some way?
So I think for me, what comes to mind right out of the gate is one of my very first yoga classes. A friend invited me to Nantucket, and we went to a class at a studio, I don't know if it's still there, called Yoga Smith. And we were doing the class, and it was really challenging, and I was really enjoying it. And then he called wheel pose, and the teacher came up behind me because I had met him at the desk, and I had said, this is my first class. And he said, grab my ankles. And I went up into the back bend of wheel, and I just started crying. And I just felt like everything the teacher had said in that class was nothing I hadn't heard before, but he was so authentic, he was so real, and he was so present to me. Like the fact that he came over to me at this peak pose in the class and made himself available. And he didn't try to take me anywhere. He didn't try to push me. He didn't proselytize. He just said, you've got this, I've got you, something like that. And I grabbed his ankles and went up, and my whole chest opened, and I just started crying. And I felt like I want to be able to touch people and affect them as powerfully as possible. And in that moment, I knew being a therapist was going to be a limit to that. And in that very moment, I knew there was more I could offer to people, and I wanted to offer it.
Very cool. If somebody was looking for more about what you're doing, the retreats you've been talking about, where can they go?
Yeah, the simplest place is just to go to my website, taylorwhitemoffat.com. And there you have a link to sign up for the mailing list and the newsletters, as well as information about retreats and workshops and other things that are happening.
Well, thank you so much, Taylor. I just really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I hope your listeners will keep tuning into you. You are a great example of what a little wave can do in the world. And so thanks for bringing to light all of this great wisdom that so many people will be able to share, and that we all get to keep growing and learning from.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you think somebody would benefit from this episode, please do share it with them. You can find this episode and others at kimfoss.me on the Little Waves project page. And if you know someone inspiring whose story you'd like to hear on this podcast, please reach out to me on the contact page of kimfoss.me or direct message me on Instagram at the Little Waves Project. And I just want to give credit and say thank you to Late Night Radio for providing the music that you're hearing on these episodes. And a huge thanks to Evan Hall for providing the artwork for the Little Waves Project. As always, go out there, know you have an effect on those around you, and make your waves. You've got this.